Good evening, everyone. This is Gary Cinderbrand, current chairman and founder of Betterpath. Thanks for joining us this evening. We're going to go through a number of elements. Some of you that were on our first call last week, prior investors, I will tell you up front, this will largely not be repetitive. Hopefully, we'll be able to give you some of the detail, a lot of the detail, as to exactly how we plan on putting ourselves out of startup mode and into the realm of becoming a real business. We have taken the liberty of muting each of your microphones. You do have the ability to unmute them. I would ask that you do not do that for now. We have several people who will be speaking remotely, and for those gentlemen, before you speak, if you would unmute, that would certainly help us a lot as we go. So some of you may know the full backstory, some of you may not. The reality of it is that Betterpath was an idea that was originally conceived as far back as 2011. In 2012, with the help of a lot of very dedicated people, it became a company, and in 2013 began raising money to pursue what at the time seemed like a fairly simple question. If I'm diagnosed with a disease for which there is no cure, and there are multiple ways to treat that disease, how do I know what's best for me? And from that question, which seems that it should be able to be answered, the company was born. Now, there is an answer to that question. And what we found out was that even though the answer will eventually avail itself, getting there is hard. And we are not the only ones that have thought of this. Any physician, any healthcare system, any insurance payer, any patient wants that answer. But again, getting there is not necessarily simple. We raised a bunch of money and we put it to work, and we built an incredible team of highly dedicated engineers and marketing people and physicians, and we were well on the way. To found Betterpath, I had left originally my position as a financial advisor to get the company started. After I'd returned to my prior life, unfortunately 6 months later, as big a surprise to me as it was to many of you, the company shut down. There were a number of confusing things that happened, which I won't go into, but what I will tell you is that we took immediate action as founders and major shareholders and recovered our software and began rebuilding. And over the past year plus, largely with Matt Cinderbrand, who helped me found this company and also happens to be my son, hence the same last name, this company has been rebuilt and is ready to go back to market in a way that we didn't fully appreciate a couple of years ago, but in a way that I've never been more excited to talk about. Matt has attracted a team of incredibly talented people, all of whom are passionate about the exact same reason we built Betterpath, but approach the problem from a completely different perspective. Betterpath sought to solve one question and realized as we moved forward, we had to invent our way to that solution, primarily because of the disorganization and absolute futility of trying to use medical records in their current state. We finally realized if we're going to do this the right way, big data equals useless data. What we needed to do was manufacture a brand new kind of record. What we didn't know was that there were people all throughout the healthcare ecosystem trying to address the same problem at an institutional level. How do we get healthcare system A, which uses Epic as its electronic health record, to integrate and find out what's going on with healthcare system B clear across the country that uses Cerner? And some of the people on this call will talk to you about their experiences. Had we known what their problem was, or they known about Betterpath sooner, I'm not sure where we'd all be. But I do know one thing I'm sure of. I'm sure glad that this crew is with us today. So as we move into this relaunch, what I want to emphasize is this is a very unusual startup. It's a startup with a fully developed software platform. It's a startup with advisors and employees who are completely dedicated to answering the question that we originally posed around one disease. And it's an opportunity for those of you on this call to come on board with us in something that is not only socially meaningful, but also, if we can do job number one and solve this, will be financially rewarding as well. At this point, what I'd like to do is turn it over to our CEO, Matt Cinderbrand.
Thanks a lot, Gary. Really excited that all of you have chosen to join in on this call, and to the advisors and other team members. Real pumped to get you guys going. So I'm going to get out of my own way here. And it's basically just an agenda for us. We're going to cover how we intend to dive into the commercial marketplace using the technology we already have by deploying it into pharmaceutical and contract research organizations. Then we're going to cover the longer term plan to really infiltrate into communities and establish an ecosystem that benefits all stakeholders of the system, from patients to providers to researchers. We're going to go a little bit into the strategy, timing, and tech with our team of advisors, do some demos, and we'll cap it off with the capital plan and a little bit of a summary on the investment. So looking at the long-term mountain that we intend to climb, we know that we have to be patient, and we have to be thoughtful about how we approach these individual goals that we've set out for ourselves. And really, the long-term goals you can see at the top is to capture these complete sets of data for every stakeholder in the system, because every stakeholder in the system, from the patient to the provider to the researcher to the entire health system itself, will benefit from access to complete sets of information. We're going to start with pharma and CROs because the technology that we developed to extract individual pieces of information from a patient's record is directly applicable to the pain points that they experience trying to identify and recruit clinical trial participants. Moving on, we're going to go into communities and really engage community leaders to define for us how a complete set of healthcare information is valuable to them. Following from that, we're going to expand that model into all consumers, so we can really begin to lay out this ecosystem of complete medical records in a way that's going to allow us to shift that perspective that, really what we look at right now is this paternalistic model of medicine. What we're preempting here is this shift to consumerism. That shift has to happen because, as we can kind of see from the current state of the system, consumers are really the only ones with skin in the game. So getting them to understand that having access and control over your entire medical record is essential is really one of our main goals moving forward. Following from there, we're going to bring this concept to the system level. As I said, every stakeholder in this ecosystem stands to benefit from access to that complete set of information. Now, if you see on the right here, we start with data, and data is relatively just noise. But as we accumulate that data and get smarter about processing it into a standard vocabulary, that noise becomes knowledge. And as we accumulate that knowledge into a tangible summary of individual populations, that knowledge ends up becoming wisdom. Really, that's the goal here, is to get to that wisdom in healthcare.
Matt, as we think about this, and we've spent a lot of time talking about what did we miss the first time? Well, it wasn't what we missed, it's what I missed. What I missed was trying to take the risk out along the way, because I didn't have exposure to some of the gentlemen that are helping us now who have real experience in the pharma space or the community space. I didn't understand the tools we were constructing in real time could have actually gone to market sooner than this, and we could have impacted and disrupted the pharmaceutical space and the community space. And in doing so, we start the one thing that we really were fighting to get in the first iteration of Betterpath through a singular disease, through inflammatory bowel disease. But the more data we come in, the more valuable this tool becomes. The more valuable this tool becomes, the more people who will be inclined to use it. So this concept of trying to get to the top of this mountain means we've got to establish a base camp. We've got to establish things that we're good at. We've got to get our name out there, that we are a fair broker and arbiter of data as we go.
That's right, Gary. And luckily for us, we found an individual who has great experience developing not only applications for pharmaceutical and biotech companies, but really is an innovative developer who has allowed us to scale our model to accommodate a vast majority of different apps. So I'd like to introduce Brandon Stiles, and Brandon, I'll let you take it from here.
Hey, thank you, Matt. So yeah, I inherited the code base a couple months ago, and we really went to town on it. Matt and I worked together to basically get it up and running. So let me tell you a little bit about where we are right now. So when I first took a look at the code, I realized that it really is in fantastic shape. Everything about it is following best practices. It's robust, which means it can do a lot, and just couldn't be happier with the current state of things right now. So after doing a little bit of optimizations for infrastructure, we basically got it to a point where we can take this code and deploy it to essentially an environment that is secure and compliant. We've already begun testing this sort of thing to verify this. So in terms of regulation and compliance, we're in an ideal spot. Really, the third thing that we worked on was scalability. So taking this code base and making it work for one person, but also making it work for 1 billion people, right? Just by kind of flipping a switch and making it grow by itself. So incredibly happy about the technology behind that. And finally, based on all that work, we really are commercially ready at that point.
Yeah, and Brandon, just to add to that, it really wasn't until I heard your background, serving these contracts for pharmaceutical and biotech companies, that I realized that we weren't able to see the forest through the trees. So tell if you can give a little summary about how you've worked with these companies in the past and why you think Betterpath is really in a position to serve those same contracts.
Yeah, absolutely. So my background is in software consulting, as Matt mentioned, specifically for the pharma space, and I've written quite a few apps, things like clinical trial drug dosage calculators, medical screeners, clinical trial study management applications. And the common thread in all these applications is they all essentially do the same thing. Data comes in, there's a model, data goes out. So when I looked at the Betterpath platform, I realized that it could essentially replace all of these one-off, quote unquote, disposable Band-Aid apps with a way, way, way more robust solution. Something that truly leveraged a clean, modular, extensible data model, which happens to be UMLS, which you will hear about in a bit. And secondly, it's a platform that is API driven. So if I wanted to take my business and take it to the next level, it would really be with this tool. The amount of I don't want to say damage, but the amount of business opportunity that I could basically use this app to come into is incredible. Super happy with just how everything is set up, and I'd say we're super eager to get going here.
So Brandon, I have two questions I'd just like you to talk through if you could.
Sure.
First, if you were tasked with rebuilding the platform, rebuilding the software, starting tomorrow to replicate what we have now, how long would it take you? A day or two?
Yeah. So this is probably a 1.5-year project, 18 months. But more importantly, work being done by an experienced team who knows what they're doing, who has a clear set of requirements and specifications. If you were to have someone just kind of figure this out on their own, I don't think a lot of people could do it.
And you talk about an API. I guess that's an application program interface. How does that work with the core software? What does that mean?
Sure. So I'm trying to think of a good analogy here, but essentially an API is a way for other developers or other members in a community to come in and leverage the existing functionality of the platform and pull it into their own applications, right? So they're all using the same services, but instead of a lone developer or another company or whatever having to develop all this functionality on their own, they could interface with the platform using that API access and create whatever additional functionality they wanted to.
And having sold into this marketplace before, you, I assume, are going to feel a lot better having this in your toolkit.
Yes, that's an understatement.
Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Brandon. Yeah, his experience writing these apps for pharma really opened my eyes, but it wasn't until I met this individual below, Matt Goff, that really learned exactly what the process is to procure these contracts and execute on this application development. So Matt, if you could explain your background and why you believe Betterpath is really in a position to make an impact here, it'd be great.
Certainly. I've spent the past 15 years working in strategic digital communications for pharma and biotech organizations. And they would charge us with support to solve many of their business problems that would be relevant to a communication strategy from phase 2 of a product through loss of exclusivity and its entry into the generics market. And this has provided me with a bird's eye window into the challenges and the issues that they face and the volume of funds that are currently deployed by pharma and biotech to address the challenges that they face, which range from clinical trial enrollment, compliance and persistency with existing drugs that are out on the market, and overall engagement and automation. When we look at these organizations, the models that they follow are not radically different from the way that they had operated 2 decades ago. Clinical trial recruitment is still, for the lion's share of organizations and individuals involved, a fairly analog process. And so when I first had an opportunity to meet with Matt Cinderbrand and understand the platform, the technology, and what Betterpath has to offer, I became extremely excited because it lined up with so many of the problems that I had been discussing with former clients.
So Matt, as you go in and you think about engaging with your former clients or answering requests for proposal, which is how this starts, do you see any natural competitors that are doing anything close to what we're able to offer at this point?
There are a number of individuals playing in the space because the opportunity is recognized. But when we look out at the landscape, many individuals are still in development. They don't yet have a product that addresses these various issues. Other organizations have taken an existing asset from another industry and attempted to retrofit it to healthcare. And this has raised certain issues with regard to regulatory compliance, HIPAA issues, and things of the like. So Betterpath is uniquely positioned because we have an asset, and from the get-go, it was geared towards the healthcare landscape.
Outstanding. So let's talk about where you see your first opportunity with Insight.
I had spent the past, I want to say, 3 years working with one of my former clients, Insight. And in the world of biotech and pharmaceuticals, they're a relatively small player, which may sound funny for a $26 billion organization. But much of what the challenges that they face certainly could be helped and accelerated by Betterpath. First and foremost, when we look at Insight, their big focus as they look forward is around a compound called epcadostat, which is an immuno-oncology agent that works in combination with other therapies. And this is currently a trial called ECHO, recruiting across multiple different tumor types. And the challenges that they face, recruitment is limiting the speed by which they're able to bring this compound to market. So their patent is ticking away little by little, irrespective of whether they are hitting their enrollment milestones for each arm of the trial. Additionally, when we look at how they're running the trial, which is, of course, the data that they use to make all of the claims about this product, again, not being executed in an automated, scalable, or most efficient way. And so this is a low-hanging fruit opportunity for Betterpath.
Do these companies have a choice as to whether or not they try and engage with patients? I mean, one way or another, they have to do this. They're going to spend the money, correct?
Correct.
And so what we're not attempting to do is get them to commit to spending money. What we're getting them to attempt to do is just to spend less, which if you're selling something is a great way to go.
Correct. And on average, they're spending $38,000 per patient enrolled in a clinical trial, and that's an industry average.
And a large part of that is basically the sunk cost of patients that they spend money on but don't qualify.
Correct, absolutely.
Sounds like an opportunity.
A huge opportunity, and something that I imagine our future customers would be equally excited about, because that $38,000 price tag is something that I'm sure Betterpath can beat with room to spare.
And what type of request is Insight given to you? What do they ask you to try and come up with?
They have asked us in many instances, how do we raise awareness of the trials? How do we bring people into the trials faster? And how do we create a pipeline? Because at the moment, they don't truly have a pipeline, which then limits how they're able to project and bring up operations if they don't know when they're going to hit their target enrollment. And of course, target enrollment means they don't have a firm date for submission of data to the FDA.
Sounds like you're going to be filling your dance card up pretty quick.
Thanks a lot, Matt. Just to reiterate, we found our entrance into the commercial marketplace, but that doesn't mean we're going to abandon our long-term goal to serve the needs of patients and families. This phase 1 is really just meant to provide a buffer for us to conduct these phase 2 experiments in communities, as well as really get us established as a disruptive force in a massive market that is incredibly inefficient. I want to bring a number of individuals on the call right now who have taught me a lot about the troubles that patients and caregivers experience trying to coordinate disparate sets of information, and why we believe that this community is our first entrance into the consumer marketplace. So I'll bring on Seth Miller, who has been instrumental in guiding this strategy. And Seth, why don't you take it from here?
Thanks, Matt. So I got involved with Betterpath, I'd say in March of 2016. I was actually in the middle of a Crohn's flare when a friend brought me to the table and told me a little bit about what Betterpath was doing. And to say it bluntly, it resonates with me. I am the kind of patient I have a number of specialists. I keep an Excel spreadsheet on my computer of all of my blood tests for the last 12 years. And being able to have that kind of information is actually critical to me, to be able to advocate for myself with doctors and to be able to get to the right kind of care. As it turns out, I also have a good deal of startup experience and as well as consulting experience, and I became involved with Betterpath on a business level, mostly because I believe passionately in the vision that Matt and Gary have expressed, that this technology does need to be in the hands of patients, and the current system is sort of an absurdity where one doctor doesn't have what another doctor, the records that another doctor has, much less the patients themselves. So I subscribe strongly to this vision that the patients need to become captains of their own healthcare. And in order to do that, in order to steer that ship, they need some new tools. And Betterpath can create those tools.
Seth, thanks so much. I want to bring on Michael Mann now, who's been really instrumental in guiding our discussion about partnership within these elder care and family caregiver communities. Michael, if you could just give a bit of your background and explain what attracted you to Betterpath, I think it'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Matt. It's so great to be part of Betterpath's vision and with such a talented team. My background is extensive in elder care, senior care, and in the family caregiver space. I've served multiple roles as a social worker, director of social services, care manager, and a healthcare administrator, as well as a president of my own organization, Geriatrics Life Care, which is dedicated to empowering the older adults and family caregivers. Over the years, I've seen the benefits, or have had the benefits and the pleasure to serve thousands of families and their caregivers during these difficult times, care transitions. And Seth's story is so real. The challenges as a patient with chronic disease and families is immense, and those are intensified from each space, from the hospital to a skilled or rehab center, and then home. And each of those handoffs requires such a challenge. And the biggest challenge is that personal health record from each of those handoffs. And so care coordination is extremely important. And our healthcare system is very challenged right now in getting this right. It's putting a big strain on our system and all the systems. And these family caregivers are usually having to fill in the gaps. And it poses multiple challenges, whether it be just simple, just trying to help, older adults with their medications, understanding those medications. Many of them can be on between, upward 12 to 15 medications. And just trying to understand that poses a challenge with that pharmacist or that home health organization. Just right there, almost 50% of hospitalizations or rehospitalizations are just from that pharmacy challenge of making sure that older adult has the right medications. And then you have other challenges with diseases, specific diseases, whether it be dementia or stroke or Parkinson's or chronic disease such as heart failure or COPD or MS, and requiring a lot of challenges with keeping in track with the treatment plans. So we're aware that our healthcare system really, truly needs a better path. We're trying these things. We've had different value-based care now, which is really trying to align performance, care coordination with better outcomes. We have hospital readmission penalties. We've created new structures, ACOs, to facilitate better communication, care coordination. But we're still having difficulty realizing a connected care journey. The AARP every year, annually, has a study really focusing on the caregiver and the family caregiver and that burden that they have. And they've been surveyed, and it is clear that they truly want a better path. They want technology to alleviate the burden, to help them with all these little jobs. So the caregiver has so many little tasks and jobs that cumulatively add up to an endless exhaustion. And right now, the marketplace, there's apps out there, there's a lot of programs, but there's not widespread adoption. There's many people trying to do this. So I've been brought on to Betterpath really to help accelerate the later phase with trying to really work on iterations and working with strategic partnerships and those early adopters, and whether it be in telehealth or different areas where we can really align our value with theirs. And so Betterpath proprietary technology really has the ability to help facilitate this chronic care disease management and really realizing community benefit. So this isn't just an individual, it's a whole community that's challenged. So we have the ability to work in a cooperative way to help facilitate a community sharing. And that's something that's going to take a lot of effort, conversations, and partnering. And I'm excited. I've spoken with numerous contacts, VPs, C-suites, and possible early adopters for this technology. And all they want to know is more. They're really cannot believe Betterpath's capabilities and are asking really, how can this do what it's doing? Again, it's great to be here with Betterpath, and I'm looking forward to really making a difference in healthcare. That's why we're all here. And thanks again, Matt, and everyone part of Betterpath.
Thanks a lot, Michael. Yeah, we're really excited to have you. I want to take a moment to bring this up to a little bit higher level. Really talk about the problem with health data supply and demand. Communities, whether they be regional, demographic, or disease-based, provide the supply to research that is necessary for them to execute on their drug development, on their observational trials, anything. So really we have a disconnect between supply and demand that we believe a community-based approach can solve. Basically, Betterpath becomes an intermediary between the patient, their complete record, and the research that is necessary in order to make more, or in order to make treatments come to market faster, and in order to actually elicit a signal from complete sets of longitudinal information. Realigning the supply chain in this way allows us to provide benefit back to the communities and the individual members that are supplying this data, because pharma, CROs, and biotechs are paying billions of dollars every year for access to their information that they own. So we basically become the intermediary that manages that exchange of value, and in a service provider model. And we're really excited about the prospect of this working out in the family caregiver space first. So I want to bring on a number of other individuals here who have come onto the project with an incredible fervor, and realizing that we're not the first individuals to try and solve this problem. There's been a number of other efforts in this space. And Brad Tritle, if you could just touch on that a little bit, I think your experience speaks for itself.
Thank you, Matt. Yes, I started on this journey essentially around 2006 when I was helping the state of Arizona to privatize what's known as a health information exchange initiative. And then also was asked to throw my hat in the ring to be their first executive director, and I was chosen. So from 2007 to 2010, I led an organization. Its focus was on helping hospitals and physicians to adopt electronic health records, and then to see how we could exchange that data really for the providers and for the payers' purposes. This really was interesting to me because I came into healthcare not from a technology side of things, and perhaps had a little bit more of a consumer bent. I was thinking, well, why can't we make this data available to the consumer? And back then in 2007, when you talked about giving a patient or a consumer a view into their own data, you would get these looks from some providers, hospitals, and others of, why would they need to look at their own data? It was very interesting. But we began to then work on the issues of, okay, if you're going to create some type of a data sharing program for just the hospitals and perhaps other providers to share data, how do you support it from a business model standpoint? How do you solve the privacy issue? How do you solve legal issues? How do you solve the technical issues? And a lot of people have spent a lot of time working on that. And I'd say a lot of that is foundational to what we can leverage today, certainly. But along the way, I met also Dr. Bill Yasnoff, who's also an advisor, who had also been working on those same problems and come to the conclusion of, well, having it in what's called a health record bank, where every individual would have their own persistent place where their medical record would be updated by anyone who had provided care. And then it could be provided to whoever needed to see it to give care, but that the consumer, the patient, would have quote unquote ownership over that, and could also participate in research, et cetera. Very fascinating. It seemed to address a lot of the issues. It seemed at the time to also be potentially less expensive than some of the other technical issues. So I left the nonprofit in 2010 and jumped into a startup, eHealth Trust, with Dr. Yasnoff on a community basis. And we're very enthusiastic, I think, about that approach. There had been some surveys saying people would be interested in paying for this themselves. But the timing was not right. A couple of things were going on. One is a lot of the data was still on paper back then. So roughly 10% of hospitals had electronic health records back then. I think today we're up to closer to 90%. Maybe around 30% of physician offices had electronic health records back then. And I think we're also above 80% at least now today, if not higher. The other challenge was all of these hospitals and providers were working on their own ways to exchange data. And so we were almost seemingly in competition with them when we talked about setting up a separate system just for consumers to essentially do the same thing. So we learned a tremendous amount from that eHealth Trust. I think we still believe that it's the right kind of approach. Most of any one consumer's data, any one patient's data is in a single community. A lot of it is in what we call the ambulatory environment in doctors' offices, so not necessarily just in hospitals. There's been a lot of work in health information exchange done since that time, but most of it, I'll be very honest, today is still exchanging data between hospitals and doesn't provide access to a lot of the doctor's office data. I left that then startup when we shut eHealth Trust down and went into consulting, worked in the area of patient engagement, worked with some others to co-author a book on digital patient engagement. I worked for HHS in Washington on programs to help give patients better access to their data. And then the last 4 years, I've served as the CEO of Vitaphone, which is a U.S. subsidiary of a German telemedicine company. And I oversaw running a 24/7 clinical call center and doing remote patient monitoring, monitoring cardiac conditions, et cetera. And we sold the business at the end of last year, and I've jumped back into consulting this year, but always from the time that I interviewed for that board position in 2007, I was asked, are you committed to this? And I committed myself back then to trying to solve this problem. I'm very passionate about it. And I think if there's one thing I can be proud of before I die, it would be that we would solve this problem of giving every individual access to their complete health record. So I'm excited to see Betterpath where they're at, the team that we have, and also the approach that while we're working on some of the tougher issues of the medical record, that we've got some technologies we can deploy in the meantime, which I would call it really the lean startup, which is a new methodology for startup businesses over the last 7-8 years that says, hey, if you've got something now you can take to customers, by all means get it out there. It produces revenue, gets your team working, and also helps to develop partnerships in the environment. So excited to be on board as the COO, and I think we've got a great team. Thank you, Matt.
Thanks a lot, Brad. I want to highlight another individual who I'm likely the biggest fan of, as he invented this metathesaurus concept that we use to actually serve as the backbone of our interoperability engine. Mark Tuttle, if you could just comment on what the UMLS is and how you came to invent this new language, I think it'd be helpful for everyone. Mark, you might be on mute.
Yeah, sorry. User error. So it's our tax money in action. And in 1985, the National Library of Medicine, a federal agency, set out to solve what's now called the interoperability problem, or at least the terminology part of it. So they started a project to collect every authoritative terminology in medicine and biomedical research, which means, diseases, drugs, labs, genes, anatomy, social stuff, public health stuff, and so on and on and on. Because there were so many different ways of referring to the same thing, which is a big part of the problem, which is making sense that Betterpath will assemble medical information from a variety of sources, but then the next step is organizing it in a way that it's going to be useful. And without something like the metathesaurus, Betterpath would have to invent the metathesaurus. So again, the metathesaurus is this collection of all the authoritative ways of naming things in medicine, organized by meaning. And this is the difficult and tricky part. What does it mean to organize all this stuff by meaning? And the Betterpath software already exploits this organization. And one of the things that's sort of the history of technology on this is that it's kind of underused, except by academics and the private sector, which don't publish anything about it, because it's big. As you can imagine, it's very large. It has a complicated schema, and it's maintained. There's a new version comes out a couple times a year. So this is intimidating for most of the world, but not for the Betterpath people who built the technology. So I was extremely pleased when Matt found me and said, yeah, we're using it. I said, great, what are you doing? And then I said, great again. And so anyway, this is a necessary part of interoperation, because without computers, the sort of computer empowerment, without computers understanding pieces of medical information gotten from different sources, putting it together is just then a long list. So anyway, this is a very exciting project, and I look forward to working on it. So thank you, Matt.
Thanks a lot, Mark. Unfortunately, Dr. Yasnoff wasn't able to join in on this call, but you can read more about him on his bio. We're going to move forward here and start to talk about the product strategy. And Gary, if you want to give a little overview of what we got here.
I have very mixed emotions about this slide. Mostly, it's a mix of between happiness, joy, and a little bit of how did I possibly miss this? We were so focused on the top of that mountain that we talked about before, we didn't understand we should have taken a couple of breaks and established a base camp, because no one ever would have even reached our base camp, because we would have been anchored in. But things happen for a reason, and we wouldn't have met the extraordinary people you've heard on this call already had we just pushed through and figured this out sooner. But I'm sure glad that with the help of the folks that are now helping us with Betterpath, we have figured this out. So we look at our two major products, and in both cases, they share something that, as someone that has sold things no one can see their entire life, I've been in the securities business, in both cases, you have to have certain things happening in order to close a sale. Primarily, what you need is a product, but more importantly, you have to have an unmet need. And to be competitive, your product has to be able to meet that need in a way that is clearly better than what's out there right now. And in our case, it's not even close to competitive. We look at the greatest area of pain in the drug development pipeline right now. $20 billion per year is spent on clinical recruitment. Pharmaceutical companies don't have a choice. They have to spend the money. We're going to approach them with something that not only accomplishes their goals in a lot of ways that aren't only far cheaper, but dramatically better. We're going to take them out of that IBM XT environment that they're in, working with 5.25-inch floppy disk drives and a black and white monitor. And we're going to bring them in to the world of technology that so far has been largely ignored by healthcare. The three areas, the empowerment area, which is being able to educate people online at their own pace, being able to capture their data, and being able to pre-qualify them, is a major point of pain for anyone that's engaged in clinical trials, whether they're smaller clinical trials that are judging efficacy or larger ongoing trials that are judging safety for drugs that you'll be on your entire life. Those three areas at the top, the greatest pain point, lead naturally then to us producing a product that is going to anchor with that individual trial participant, the recap, which we'll show you shortly. And the recap is basically controlled by the patient. And there's value in the recap, as you'll see. And there are ways that we can incentivize the patient to get other family members involved in the recap. And we can find other people, such as the clinical trials, people who are running the clinical trials who are going to have great interest in what's going on with the patient's relatives, especially as more and more drugs are being targeted for specific genetics. It meets our need because it's a highly defined, highly disruptible market that is literally begging for a solution, and one is yet to show up. And it meets our need because it starts manufacturing data in a very compliant, highly regulated way, which Betterpath has always been good at doing. From a community perspective, it's a little bit different, but not that much. It steps up our primary objective of being able to take in large amounts of data in an extraordinary unmet need. Bottom line is, we're all going to get older, and we're all going to face very common problems. What's the red pill, Blue? What's the red pill do, Mom? I'm not really sure. I think it's for my knee, or maybe it's for my ear. What red pill? I mean, these are things we're all going to face and will be in that position at some point in time. As we heard earlier from Michael Mann, the need for this type of a solution, which immediately begins to provide value not just to the institutional caregiver, but to the patient themselves and the patient's family, who's trying to keep track of what's going on and make certain that they go to a hospital in March and they have a very expensive test done, and they show up someplace else 2 months later and they want to repeat the test, and sadly they can't remember whether it was done or not. In the fee-for-service model, they just repeat the test and bill the insurance company. In the value-based model, that test is available to that clinician. It's right there. So you're compressing the timeline, saving money and improving care. Again, the recap is the tool that is held by the patient or anyone the patient designates. And then it's up to us to build communities to keep people coming back, which we're very excited to do as soon as we start taking data in at scale, which obviously is our first objective. So we think by targeting these two areas of unmet need, especially pharma, the money is being spent. We don't have to convince anybody to spend it. We just have to show you a way to spend less. And then this extraordinary social need in the elder care space, where, as we've heard other people say, this is where the puck is going. And you can't do a thing about it. And Matt spent some time along with Dr. Miller over the past year consulting for some of these enterprises. And as you heard from Michael Mann, their tool set basically is non-existent. And that is wide open for us to start harvesting that data from a group of patients that's only going to grow over time. Matt?
Yeah, I just want to highlight really the key for us to get to this community engagement platform approach is to preempt really a shift that's occurring that I mentioned before towards this consumeristic model of medicine. And the way we're going to do that is by engaging, as we said, the individual family caregivers who are already trying to solve this problem themselves. If you want to learn more about that, I'm glad or happy to touch on it later, but I want to move forward with some of these demos. And I want to bring the expert back in, Matt Goff, who is going to explain to us just the importance of creating these educational tools for potential participants and how Betterpath's Empower can really serve those needs.
So first and foremost, Empower is something that's very much in line with what we see in the biotech and pharma space, because all of these organizations have transparency desires. They want to ensure that individuals who are making healthcare decisions, whether they're about a clinical trial or if they're beginning one of their therapies, they want to ensure that patients, caregivers, nurses, physicians, all stakeholders are fully versed in all of the educational components associated with their products. And so when we look at Empower, Empower is able to create a standardized onboarding educational experience through as you can see on the screen, a very friendly user experience. The interface, the design, everything is geared around the user, which is a significant shift from where we are today. So we're able to take a process that was previously manual, potentially inconsistent, and also something that isn't sort of standardized, and then apply Empower to that very same process. So I think this is something that many of the pharmaceutical and biotech organizations will see as valuable for multiple arms of their business.
Thanks a lot, Matt, and I'm going to be calling on you here in a second. Really, the demos here on the left that you're seeing are really to show kind of how the problem used to be solved and how we intend to solve it. Moving on to pre-qualify, what you're looking at the image here is how the typical chart review process takes place. And chart review is really the gold standard in patient identification, because when you're looking at these more detailed eligibility criteria, as you'll see in the demo here, you need to search deep within the medical record because that type of information isn't captured in the digitized data that's available in the electronic health record. So we're going to start here by looking at a set of inclusion and exclusion criteria and really just allow your imagination to take hold as to how much of a process it is to actually dig through a pile of paper to find some of these pieces of information. Matt, I want to bring you back on to really describe, how you believe this type of tool can be used to expedite this process and eventually make this chart review process a lot more efficient.
So this is a game changer for clinical trials. First, when you look at clinical trial recruitment, it's done through either a very localized campaign around the institution radio, geo-targeted ads. Everything is information-based. There's never a call to action. At best, you can have someone call a center and then begin the manual process that Matt had mentioned. This is a game changer because we're democratizing decision making. We're ensuring that patients have the ability to upload their own records and determine whether they pre-qualify. And then if they do, they're able to then tap into both their attending physician and any of the PIs at the institution conducting the clinical trial. So, there's certainly an intrinsic consumer benefit. They're able to assess multiple trials. There's scale that comes into play, which is also another consumer benefit, something that was previously done through purely manual terms. Additionally, when we look at the benefit to a pharmaceutical company, they now have a pipeline and they understand where patients sit, and they're able to better identify where these different populations exist. They can even begin to expedite enrollment into trials if there are new clinical variables that are not previously studied that may be relevant to a compound under investigation. So this is certainly something that will have a significant impact on the speed of recruitment, the quality of the data that comes out of the trial, and the overall speed by which these molecules exit pipeline and become approved by the FDA.
Thanks a lot, Matt. Yeah, and as you can see on the screen here, really the end result of this data extraction process, it was a nice, neat dashboard where a study coordinator can actually look at what's going on in their study at any given time. We're going to be rolling this out with the pre-qualified tool in a customized format for our first few clients. Moving forward, kind of the coup de grace, the real product that we built the first time around, the Betterpath Recap, really serves as a patient engagement tool for a lot of these pharmaceutical organizations, because their goal is to obviously attract patients to their clinical trial, but really a huge cost driver is the fact that there's a lot of dropout over time in these long-term trials. When studies are delayed, it creates immense cost. And I think one estimate I read is that every day of trial delay is $100 million in opportunity cost because of, as Matt Goff mentioned, the patent clock is ticking. So you look at this engagement tool that allows a patient to really activate on their set of individual information, and as it's provided by a pharma company who you want to look at as returning value to you as a participant, this is really a way to ensure that they not only stay in the study but ensure that you're able to track them over time with new data coming into the recap itself. Really overall, from Empower to Recap, we're looking at kind of a full spectrum of solutions. The great part about our product model is that we're able to deploy these different solutions individually or together. And obviously, the price will reflect that. We're going to move forward here and bring Gary back on to talk about the capital plan. Gary?
So the cash flow projections are exactly on point. That's what the future is going to look like. It seems in every presentation you need one of these things. What I want to point out, however, is that Betterpath's capital needs have largely been met. They've been met by our prior investors, who will own the same portion of the new company as they did in our first iteration. A smaller company, more efficiently positioned, company ready to go to market. So what we really need is capital to literally jumpstart the business. And in doing so, it's only fitting that recently the final provisions of the Jobs Act, JOBS, which stands for Jumpstart Our Business Sooner, seem to align with Betterpath's financing needs. So at the moment, what we're doing is we're extending to the folks on this call for as short a time as possible the opportunity to invest up to $640,000, which is what's remaining on a convertible note that we put into effect when we took the company back slightly over a year ago. We stopped raising money at that point until we understood what we had. The note is effective again. My goal is to sell zero of this note if I could, but I can't, because we're going to move out as quickly as possible, literally starting as we speak. So this note is available. In all likelihood, we'll probably try and cut this note off at somewhere around another $200,000 to $250,000. The reason for that is it's relatively expensive capital. What that means is that this note allows the note holder to convert upon an equity financing, financing using stock, at 30% less than the cost of that stock. Now, in the old days, let's say pre-2016, the only way a company such as Betterpath could achieve a true equity round was through a venture capitalist or some other very sophisticated investor. That would close out opportunities for the general public and only allow opportunities for the wealthiest. It also oftentimes led to that company marching to the tune of what the venture capital investor wanted as opposed to the needs of the company. What the Jobs Act did, something we plan on doing in December of 2017 or sooner, is to utilize Section A of the Jobs Act and raise up to $1 million in equity capital, priced equity capital, which will convert our notes at a substantial discount and allow us to really stretch our legs in the years ahead and capture increasing amounts of revenue in the community space. The community space will require more of a marketing budget. It will require Brad Triddle, who will be working as our Chief of Operations, and Matt, our CEO, to find other folks like Mike Mann who get it, who want this story. And Michael's going to be working with us as well. But that's going to require a little bit more capital, and we're going to be ready to run at that point. But we're going to start in those two markets. At the moment, raising up to $640,000 in our convertible notes. This is open to accredited investors, sophisticated investors. What that means is a minimum income of a couple $100,000 a year and or minimum net worth of $1 million. I'd like to keep it at a $50,000 minimum, but based on the amount of interest we've had, I may cut that allocation back to $25,000 because it's more important for me to have the right people associated as core investors at this stage than to try and sell the majority of what's left to one individual. As I said, we're going to keep this note open only as long as we have to. And the reason is the people that buy this note, as you'll see at the bottom, come December, when we do our first equity offering using crowdfunding, when we do that offering, if we price that offering at $5 a share, the people that own this note are going to pay $3.50 a share. Now, again, I can't tell you what the future holds. I can't tell you what we're worth if it's anything. We're a startup with all the attendant risks and disclaimers. What I can tell you is I have never felt more optimistic about the business prospects of Betterpath than I do standing here right now and talking to each of you. I give Matt Cinderbrand an extraordinary amount of credit for doing the work to push this up the hill. And Matt, how you attracted these people, I can't begin to understand, but I think we're all going after the same thing. And for each of our advisors you see on this page, gentlemen, I could not be more proud to be associated with each and every one of you. If you have an interest in the note, please let me know as quickly as possible. My email address is gary@betterpath.com. I'm not looking to close anybody out of this opportunity. If you've taken the time to be on this call, we certainly welcome your participation. The only thing I would say is based on the demand that we have, if it's a larger number that you're looking for, I may not be able to give it to you right away. I want to see where most folks are. If you've got any questions whatsoever about our business plan, our approach, or how that may work, please email matt@betterpath.com and we'll get you an answer. But for capital questions and things of that nature, please email me at gary@betterpath.com. I want to take a moment to thank the entire team. Extraordinary guys. If I didn't know about this company, I'd want to invest. I do appreciate all of your time, and for Mike and for Brad, Brandon, Matt Goff, Mark Tuttle, guys, and Seth, who I haven't talked to in a while. It's good to hear your voice again. Gentlemen, always a privilege and a pleasure to hear you speak. Thanks to all of our participants for hanging in there with us. We'll be circulating a recording of this call, which you should receive shortly, and I wish you all a very pleasant evening.